All right, David, you want to go ahead and take us off?
For sure. Let's get it rolling, folks. Yeah, again, just wanted to thank you all for being here today. Our conversation here will be centered around extending collective bargaining rights to tenants, getting some of the early lessons from San Francisco's Union at Home Ordinance. Definitely just want to thank you all for being here. I wanted to thank the UC Berkeley Labor Center, as well as the Housing Rights Committee of San Francisco for hosting this event. My name is David Dixon. I use he and they pronouns. I am a Master's of Public Affairs student at the Goldman School of Public Policy here at Cal Berkeley. My partners for this event, well, I can actually let them come off of mute very quickly and introduce themselves.
And I'm sorry to interrupt, David, but I believe we're going to do a little introduction since we're providing interpretation. I was told we were going to do a little intro. Sorry to interject. In order to make it an inclusive space, we have Spanish speakers here too. So I wanted to just give it a little introduction and the instructions as to how to connect to the interpretation function on Zoom, if that's okay with all of you.
Yes. My apologies, Liliana. Please go right ahead.
No worries, David. Thank you. So thank you again. My name is Liliana Herrera. I'm a language justice interpreter, consultant and coach, and I am here to help make this space more inclusive and equitable. And that means we're going to be utilizing the Zoom interpretation function, which will be activated momentarily. But first, I wanted to share some instructions, and I'm going to repeat this message in Spanish. Muy buenas tardes, me llamo Liliana Herrera, soy su intérprete para servirle esta tarde, para podernos comunicar en una manera más inclusiva, equitativa. En unos momentos vamos a activar la función de Zoom para la interpretación y así cada persona podrá escucharse en su idioma preferido. So once we activate the interpretation function, you will see a globe icon at the bottom of your screen if you are connecting via computer or laptop. And you want to ask everyone, even if you are bilingual, to please select a language channel in order for everyone to be heard. And with that, I want to remind especially the speakers to please speak at a moderate pace, a little slower than you usually would in a conversation. That I'm sort of modeling that pace, just taking breaths in between your phrases. Spanish contains up to 30% more content than English, so there's already a natural delay. So if we keep that in mind to make sure no one is left behind, just breathe between phrases, and that will help to send oxygen to the brain and speak a little more slow. Entonces, sí, quiero pedirles a todas las personas, especialmente a los panelistas, a las personas que hablen a un ritmo moderado, tomando en cuenta que el español contiene casi 30% más de contenido que el inglés, y queremos asegurar podernos escuchar todos claramente. En unos momentos vamos a activar la función de interpretación, que consiste para poder ingresar a su canal de idioma, ya sea español o inglés. Les pedimos a todas las personas que seleccionen su canal. Aparecerá un globo terráqueo en la parte inferior de su pantalla, donde va a poder seleccionar su canal. If you are connecting via a tablet, iPad, or your phone, you will find the interpretation function by clicking on the 3 dots or the More option, select Language Interpretation, and then click Done. Si se está conectando mediante su teléfono móvil, su tableta o iPad, podrá seleccionar su canal ingresando en los 3 puntitos, Más o More, donde podrá seleccionar Interpretación, su canal, y no olvide presionar Finalizar. Thank you so much. So we can go ahead and activate the function. And again, okay, thank you.
Thank you so much for providing your services today and just making sure that the space is accessible for folks. Absolutely. Again, my name is David Dixon. I'm a Master's of Public Affairs student at the Goldman School of Public Policy here at Cal Berkeley. Do want to take just a brief second to wanted to introduce our partners in this work, Brad Hirn and Lena Malibaum from the from HRC, the Housing Rights Committee of San Francisco. Also wanted to allow my classmates and research partners to briefly introduce themselves as well.
Thanks, David. Hi, everyone, and thanks for being here. My name is Natalie Spievack, and I'm a Master's of City Planning student at UC Berkeley.
Absolutely. Thank you, Natalie. Thank you, Natalie. I think we have Vivian on with us. I know she may also come into the conversation just a little bit later. But Vivian Vazquez is also a Master's of Public Policy student at the Goldman School of Public Policy here at Cal Berkeley. So yeah, I think just as a reminder for folks, we do have about 30 to 45 minutes allocated for our panelists to just converse with each other. Natalie will be leading that discussion. And any questions you may have, we want to try to get to those. So please feel free to add those to the Q&A feature here on Zoom. As a reminder, this event is being recorded. And again, thanks to Liliana, this event is also will be provided in Spanish as well. And so wanted to just give a brief overview regarding the ordinance itself. So what is the Unit at Home Ordinance? This ordinance that was passed in April of 2022 over in San Francisco grants new rights and protections to tenants living in buildings with 5 or more units. Specifically, it gives tenants the right to form an association with neighbors in their building. It gives them new protections for flyering, door knocking, and holding tenant meetings on site. Also making a legal requirement for the landlord to meet and negotiate with the tenant association of that building. Again, new rights and protections are classified as official housing services. And additionally, the ordinance states that if the landlord violates these rights or protections, tenants are entitled to rent reductions, amongst other potential outcomes. Thank you, Natalie. Next slide, please. And so just wanted to briefly go over some of our methodology as we spent our fall semester together researching this ordinance. So we partnered with the Housing Rights Committee of San Francisco to conduct an implementation survey and study of the Unit at Home Ordinance. HRC, which has been deeply involved in the design, the passage and implementation of the ordinance, helped to guide the scope of our research. And ultimately, we conducted interviews with San Francisco tenants who have used the ordinance, nonprofit organizations that are involved in tenant organizing, and a landlord association that again represents landlords in San Francisco, to really understand how key stakeholders involved in implementation of this ordinance have interpreted and used the provisions in the ordinance so far, but also to identify its strengths and weaknesses, and to understand how similar laws can be scaled moving forward. So as you can see, we were able to, our sample set was relatively small. Granted, we had about 4 months to conduct our research together, but our conversations with tenants, with landlords, and nonprofit leaders lasted on average an hour, some an hour and a half, where we really just spent time diving in, and to a certain extent picking their brain and understanding their experience. Thank you. Next slide. So under the utilization of the ordinance, so it is stated within the ordinance that 51% of the people in the building must sign that they agree to be in the tenant association. What we saw from our conversations were that tenants shared that knocking on doors, sharing information from neighbor to neighbor around the ordinance, and really just sharing their challenges allowed them to connect with their neighbors on a very human level, particularly folks that they may have not had a previous relationship with in their building. Some of the common issues that we saw folks organizing and bargaining around were rent increases in payments, graffiti removal on the outside, or in some cases the inside of buildings, sidewalk cleaning, secured entrances, stolen packages, and also construction projects, particularly construction projects that were not necessarily run by tenants. And that may come up in our conversations today as well. And lastly, we saw that tenants whose buildings were owned by large landlords, such as Veritas Corporation, shared that their landlords were using what was considered a stalling method, in that they may meet with individuals after the association had been formed, but they were not necessarily meeting with the association or association representatives as a collective body. Thank you. Next slide. So really just wanted to highlight just the benefits here and the challenges, but really wanting to, what we really pulled out of some of our conversations was that the protections afforded to tenants were really reminded tenants that they weren't alone in their struggle. I think that is one of the, as organizers, one thing that we can often feel is siloed in our experiences and very siloed in our efforts to improve upon those experiences. And one of the main threads across all of our conversations were that tenants really felt a level of solidarity with each other through organizing together. We also saw a new level of confidence in making these complaints to their landlords, but also about their landlords, and really feeling that this was an avenue for them to hold their landlords accountable for the things that they said they would do to improve their buildings. Also, multiple tenants stated that although they had not had an association meeting with their landlords, individual communications, repairs, and updates have been happening in a timely manner. And one of the things from that, generally feeling that landlords felt that pressure from a collective organization of tenants and seeing that solidarity amongst their residents. So we estimated that of about 1,000 units of retail housing, so tenants in more than 50 apartment buildings across San Francisco, ranging from 5 to 12 units, have used the ordinance to form tenant associations and bring their concerns to their negotiating table with their landlords. And within that number, we estimate that to be about 1,000 units of rental housing with about 750 tenant members across San Francisco. Next slide, please. And lastly, just speaking to some of the challenges that emerged. So several interviewees suggested that people not utilizing the ordinance because they just genuinely did not know it exists. The Landlord Association noted that awareness is a particular challenge for people who speak different languages also. I'm definitely thankful from our conversations with HRC that they were also putting out multilingual pamphlets and multilingual notices to the tenants that they were organizing. One tenant noted that the hesitation that they or some of their neighbors may have felt was really based around a concern that the landlord may retaliate, ultimately resulting in their potential eviction. Additionally, several of the folks that we interviewed also expressed a level of uncertainty around the enforcement mechanism and whether that would be effective or not. We saw that tenants and housing nonprofits also feared that their relationship with landlords may be ruined as a result of this ordinance. And next slide, please. I think that may be the last slide, actually. So with that, I will pass it over to my classmate and research partner, Natalie. Definitely thank you for moderating this panel, and thank you for our panelists for your time today. Thank you, Natalie.
Great, thanks, David. So now that we've provided a little bit of an overview of some of the findings from our research, I want to invite our 4 wonderful panelists who are here with us today, Deepa, Katie, Madeline, and Lena, to briefly introduce themselves. So if the 4 of you could just say a little bit about who you are, how you've been involved either with the Union at Home Ordinance or tenant collective bargaining more broadly, and then just one little anecdote about something that made you believe in the power of collective bargaining. That would be great. So maybe Deepa, can you go first?
Sure thing. I work at Tenants Together, which is a statewide tenants' rights organization in California. But before that, I worked for 10-ish years in San Francisco as a tenant attorney, and then as the director of the San Francisco Tenants Union. And actually, the way I got involved in this work is that when Brad Hirn first got his job as the organizer at Housing Rights Committee, he came over to my office and he said, "What if we organize Veritas tenants?" And I said, "I'll give you all our intake forms, and then you can call them." And then we went and door knocked some buildings together. And then, and some of the folks on this call became some of the biggest leaders in the city on tenants' rights from having been door knocked by Brad. So, and in terms of just anecdotally, I just can't say enough how powerful it's been to see tenants speaking up on their own behalf rather than advocates or lawyers doing it for them, whether it's in City Hall or in the press. Since the Veritas Tenants Association has formed, the tenants movement has won everything we've asked for at City Hall in San Francisco, and every politician is afraid of them, straight up. So with that, I think I'll pass it to Lena.
Thank you so much, Deepa. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Lena Maibaum. I am born and raised here in San Francisco. My main background is from hospitality and customer service, also a freelance photographer. So I now work as an organizer alongside with Brad at the Housing Rights Committee. So my career did a 180 because I live in a rent control building for over 20 years. My building was purchased by Veritas, which forced me to do outreach and inform tenants who live under Veritas's building to know their rights, because I didn't know that tenants even have rights. And I am proud to be part of this wonderful organization. I will pass it to Madeline.
Hello, everyone. My name is Madeline McMillan. I am a Veritas Tenants Association member. I am also a SEIU 10-to-1 member for about 25 years. As Lena mentioned, I am a San Francisco native as well. Let's see, your question was to mention something about what made me realize the power of tenant organizing, and it was my rally that I participated in 2019 down at Veritas headquarters. And we shut down downtown San Francisco during commute hours. And having so many tenants organized, coming together, fighting for Veritas to stop the rent increase it was a rent increase for, I can't remember the word I'm trying to use, but it'll come to me.
I can intervene. It's the operating maintenance pass-through.
The pass-throughs, right. That's what we were fighting for, and actually we won. And having that power and knowing that we can all come together and succeed at something for against our landlords, that made me realize the power in tenants organizing. And I wanted to continue to be a part of this whole association. And I will pass it to Brad.
I'll pass it to Katie. Thanks, Madeline.
Thanks, everyone. It's so good to be with you all. I apologize for my video. It might shake a little bit, but I'm Katie Goldstein. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the Director of Housing and Healthcare Campaigns for the Center for Popular Democracy. We're a national network of 48 power building multi-issue organizations across the country. And I also help to lead Renters Rising, which is a national tenant union of tenants organizing corporate tenants across the country. And I know a bunch of folks from Renters Rising are on the call, so it's good to be with everybody that we're doing this powerful work together. When I was asked this question, it helped me reflect a little bit on some of my past victories, but I'm actually going to talk about the first building I ever organized back in 2007, which was a 350 unit. I'll go back. The first building that I ever organized back in 2007, which was a 350 unit subsidized building in New York. And it was about to lose all of its affordability, and tenants were about to be displaced. And we organized a tenant union and had many, many meetings to figure out a structure, a strategy, did petitions, did meetings, did actions, did rallies. And then we actually were able to win a 20-year extension of that contract. And I remember the power that I felt with all of the tenants about how people who were doing such extraordinary things to make sure that their housing is protected and they're able to live with dignity and stability that they deserve. So that's something that was incredibly powerful. And I've really been chasing that feeling to be able to hit the power and the scale ever since.
Thank you so much to all of you. Very inspiring. So first, I want to go to Deepa. And Deepa, can you just tell us a little bit about how San Francisco's Union at Home Ordinance came to be and what the history of trying to codify collective bargaining rights for tenants has been?
Yeah, for sure. So my sense is that this started when Tenants Together, my organization now, what asked tenant groups around the state, what is your issue? What's the biggest issue you're dealing with so we can set legislative priorities for tenants' rights in California and introduce a bill next year? And we heard all kinds of things in those conversations with tenant groups, including habitability, harassment, fear of retaliation. When folks asked for the habitability to stop, the repairs to get made. And we were just generally recognizing that there was this imbalance of power between landlords and tenants, and that no matter what rights already existed for tenants, the tenants were afraid to speak up on their own behalf. So folks from different member orgs came together and determined that maybe the way to collect all of these issues into one issue and also work on building was to basically support tenant organizing itself, and figure out if there was a bill that we could introduce that would basically reward tenants for organizing, remind tenants they can organize, and remove barriers to organizing. And so in the initial idea of the bill, it was that if tenants organize an association, they will gain just cause protections. That if tenants organize an association, the landlord has to recognize that association and work with them. And if the landlord doesn't do that, that can be grounds for fines, fees, and additional defenses in their cases. If in case the landlord tries to go after them or evict them for some reason. And we also actually went really bold and said that we wanted to create a right to strike. In some states, like New York, actually, if a tenant doesn't pay their rent and they lose a case, they have the right to pay all the rent at the end of the case and keep their tenancy. They have a right of redemption, whereas in California, tenants just have to prove a defense in order to not get evicted if they have not paid their rent. So we were thinking about ways, and we're like, oh, this means it'd be much easier to run a rent strike. It'd be much less risky. So we were trying to think about all the ways in which we were trying to imagine creating a safer environment for organizing, similarly to the way that some states make it easier or harder to organize workers' unions, like right to work states versus much more union-friendly states. We unfortunately lost that fight at the state level, but because the Veritas Tenants Association and a bunch of other groups in San Francisco got really invested in the idea, they moved forward with what they could do locally, which was the second of those three prongs, which was trying to basically create additional protections and additional defenses if tenants organize a tenants association. And they passed and they won. And we're seeing the results right now.
Thank you, Deepa. So going over to you next, Madeline, as someone who has organized your building, and I believe you were one of the first 15 buildings to organize on the day the ordinance was passed back in April of 2022. It would be great if you could tell everyone a little bit about the process of organizing your building. So what was successful, what was challenging, and how you and your fellow tenants have benefited from organizing.
Unmute myself first. Okay, so the process of organizing my building was a very hands-on. It's a challenge to actually, go and knock on your neighbor's door and that you really don't know. Speaking for me personally, I don't really know a lot of my neighbors personally. I'm not, I guess you could say I'm kind of shy. So it's a challenge for me to even get up the courage to knock on the doors, first of all. So it was a challenge to knock on the door and introduce myself and give my neighbors information about our landlord. Some neighbors don't want to talk, they don't want to listen, and you just have to be a little somewhat aggressive. I had Lena always go with me because she's my support system. But asking the neighbors to join our association by giving them some information about what Veritas is doing to other tenants, even though they may not be having issues themselves. It's all about supporting other fellow tenants in our building or in another building. Just know that everybody is not treated the same. Some information you can tell by the looks on their face that they were very welcoming to hearing what I was saying. And some tenants just shut me down. So you have to just kind of be prepared to not always take things personal when they shut you down and just kind of being welcoming. I feel like the ordinance kind of made it where when you go to speak to your neighbors, that you let them know about the ordinance and that talking to me, telling me what you may want, what you may need, what's going on, that you would like, that there could be no, you would not be retaliated against because that is a part of the ordinance that talking or organizing, picking out board members and things of that nature would not come against you. We just had a small mini campaign, poster campaign that we went, we went and asked the tenants my neighbors to put the poster on their doors. And I got a majority to do it, but the very next day, they were taken off the doors and left right in front of their door. Can I say that I have proof that it was the manager that was removing those posters? No, I don't have proof, but I do feel like it was Veritas because that's like for the tenants that I didn't get to talk to, it shows what is going on with our organization. So that is a challenge because I did put the posters back up, and then I just in my door I have a very firm tape now, and I am the only one that is the poster is still up. I went back to see if I could get the others to put it on their door, and some did. And then I also added a couple new ones that were willing to put the poster on the door. But you know, like I mentioned from the beginning, it's very hands-on. You have to be very consistent, and but I feel like now they're willing, a little more willing to talk to me, knowing that nothing can come about it.
Thank you so much, Madeline. It's really helpful to hear your firsthand experience with the ordinance. And I want to talk a little bit now about some of the strengths of the ordinance and opportunities for strengthening. So Katie, why don't we go to you first? What do you think really stands out about San Francisco's model, and what do you think could be improved upon? And then we'll hear from Lena after that.
Sure, absolutely. So I organize at the national level to try to expand tenant power and tenants' rights. So really the extraordinary thing about this ordinance is that it sets such a powerful precedent for organizing across the country and really solidifies the necessity and the central importance of tenant organizing and tenant unions. Nothing is going to change in our housing system without mass tenant power. And so that's why we have to be able to build it across the country. I also love, just as somebody that's organizing a mass campaign, taking on corporate landlords, that it came from this critical organizing in corporate-owned properties, because corporate actors really are the drivers of the housing crisis we see today. And so really we see the building of enforced accountability from landlords to tenants is the way forward to actually regulate our housing market and make sure that tenants have the dignity that they deserve. So the things that are really amazing about it that we're trying to emulate other places is the forced accountability that's regulated by the city, the protections to organize, and that tenants are actually able to bring tenants to the table. Tenants are able to bring landlords to the table to be able to enforce rights. And then some of the things that I think are missing that we'd love to see other places is, of course, the ability to strike, because that's the biggest power that tenants have. And the most escalated tactics is to really hit landlords in the pocket. And then also that not all of the housing stock is covered, because housing markets and housing stock is different places. But I really want to just extend so much gratitude to the organizers and tenants that set this precedent in San Francisco. And we're so excited to be building off of it across the country.
Great, thanks. Lena, do you want to add to that?
Yes, thank you. So the strengths of this ordinance is basically around, first of all, is getting a majority of signatures on a petition. The strength is majority, it shows power to the tenants, and it can always, have the tenants talk to each other, even if they never met the tenant at the end of the hallway. It allows tenants to talk and really build power within their building. Also, the ordinance requires the landlord to recognize the tenants association with the majority. Tenants can always organize on their own, but with this ordinance, it definitely requires landlords to come to the table with the association and discuss issues in a more binding way. There is a civil code that we used to allow us to enter in the buildings. But again, this ordinance is more specific for allowing tenants to invite organizers like Deepa, myself, or Brad into the building to talk with anyone that we can reach by door knocking. And then the other thing is, it was mentioned before that organizing activity has become a house service. A house service is something like heat or water. So it's a very essential house service that this ordinance has. the importance of this, because it now means that tenants can get a rent reduction if the landlord interferes with the organizing. It definitely hits the landlord's pockets, which is where the power is with the tenants. And if they keep interfering with organizing, then they will definitely start losing their rent. It's kind of like a mini strike to build momentum until we do need to fully strike. So it takes away their money from the landlord's pockets. So.
Great, thanks, Lena. And just on the topic of areas for strengthening, I'll add that one thing that we heard in our interviews, or a couple things we heard in our interviews, are that so under this ordinance, only buildings with 5 or more units have the right to organize. So that leaves a gap for people who live in smaller buildings, which is something to continue thinking about moving forward. And then second, the ordinance does not cover tenants in nonprofit buildings, which we also heard from interviewees as a challenge, because tenants in nonprofit buildings are often experiencing a lot of the same challenges with their landlords as tenants in other buildings. So just wanted to mention those couple of things. But also now wanted to move into talking about enforcement, which we also heard in our interviews is a major challenge. And so Deepa, I wanted to go to you next. So tenant harassment is closely interwoven with the right to organize and is a key issue that tenants have been organizing around. So can you tell us what you've come to understand are the components of enforcement that do or don't work for addressing tenant harassment?
Absolutely. So tenant harassment has been a priority for a lot of tenant groups around the state and around the country. It's a major way that landlords maintain their power over tenants and keep the fear in tenants that they aren't going to be able. Basically, it's the way that they manage to keep tenants from exercising their rights is by maintaining is because tenants are afraid of getting harassed if they do. Harassment can look like a lot of things. It can look like threats of eviction without notices. It can look like constant offers of buyouts. It can look like turning off utilities. It can look like actual verbal or physical attacks. And what we've seen is that a lot of, there have been some great wins. Most recently in LA, we've won some, we won things back in the day in San Francisco as well. But it all involved tenants having to go to some agency or some city agency actually levying fines or fees against a landlord. And so people had to individually decide to fight their landlord about the fact that they'd been harassed. And anybody who's afraid of harassment as an individual is not going to do that because they're already, right? I mean, like it just sort of requires the tenant to be so empowered in and of themselves and to have so many resources in terms of time or legal support or administrative support to actually bring a case. And at the end of the day, a judge is listening to one tenant versus one landlord about whether something happened. And so they might not even get the fine. So it just made sense for landlords to continue harassing because the rewards are so high for the landlords, especially in a city where they're able to jack up the rents if they get the tenants out. So what's so great about this ordinance, and I'm hopeful as we see it roll out that we'll see better enforcement for something with this model, is that the landlord risks losing money by the very act of harassing. Because it's similarly like to landlords risking losing money for not making repairs, it winds up being almost self-enforcing in a sense, especially if the tenants are organized. Basically, what I mean by that is in this scenario where we've got a building with a tenant association and then the landlord interferes with the organizing. Now the landlord knows that if they try to evict any of those tenants, the tenants can raise this harassment as a reason that their rent should be reduced. and win the case. And the reality is landlords don't actually, because we threw that huge wrench in the landlord's plan of pushing people out, and they don't even know how much money is going to be involved, and it's interfering with their own control of the property. We hope to see that might actually self-enforce and actually scare the landlords into complying and actually behaving in a fair way to their tenants, in a way that these like individually enforced fees and fines are not going to do.
Thank you. That's really helpful. And so, Madeline, going to you next, are there any lessons that you have learned through the process of organizing that you would want to share with other cities that are interested in passing an ordinance like this?
Let's see, what would I want to share is that there's definitely a possibility of passing an ordinance in your own city or state. You just have to just be hands-on and be organized. It takes a lot of work. You have to be committed, and know that it can't be done overnight. You know, I feel like it's almost you can almost take it as like if you've been in a union setting and you are going about, you know, trying to bargain for wages. You have to get all your wants in a row, not just my building or Lena's building. You have to talk to every building and come up with a plan of what are your priorities. So I think that to share with another city that is trying to come up with the same thing, you just have to be consistent. You have to be able to talk to all the buildings, all the neighbors, if possible. Like I said, it won't be done overnight, and you're not going to reach everybody at the time you're at that building. So the more help you have, the better it will be. You just have to have faith and believe and be consistent and hit the ground and do what you need to do. Sometimes you might have to, you know, have more than one rally or march, you know.
Great, thank you. And so, Katie, one more question before we move to audience Q&A. This is a really exciting moment where San Francisco is kind of setting an example for what law that establishes the right to organize could look like. And I know other cities are looking to San Francisco and state governments are looking to San Francisco. So I'm curious if you could tell us a little bit about what you think it would take to expand this model to other cities or to state or federal levels even.
Absolutely. I mean, I think a real challenge around this is that most tenants nationally don't have protections through a rent stabilization system, which is a key protection in San Francisco. And there really does need to be an apparatus that can oversee the housing stock and see that its role is to actually mediate the relationship between landlords and tenants, assuming at the forefront that it is an exploitative relationship. These are not two neutral parties. There actually needs to be the role of government to say landlords are interested in exploiting tenants. We need to actually regulate that relationship. And that is why rent regulation is so critical. And while we haven't won universal rent control and universal tenant protections just yet, even though of course we're organizing for them, it is difficult to imagine some of these protections in place in places where there are no eviction protections and no rent caps. But I also think that tenant unions are the place to start, right? Because tenant power is the central way to enforce protections and make sure that tenants have the dignity that they deserve. So for instance, Renters Rising, we're a national tenants union. We're a national.
Thank you, Katie. If you could just slow down a little bit. Thank you.
I will. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
We're a national tenant union that organizes tenant and corporate owned properties all across the country, in places where there is some sort of rent regulation and in places where there isn't. And what we're trying to do is directly negotiate with corporate landlords and their trade associations and lobbying groups to actually get what tenants need. Because in many of those environments, too many elected officials are bought and sold by the real estate industry. And so we really see that all tenants have the need for all of these tenant protections, and tenants are really organizing and fighting back all across the country. And they've been saying what they need over and over again and organizing for what they need. They need just cause eviction protections, rent control and caps, habitability and safety standards, and they need accountability from their landlords. And that can really only happen with this unified body of a tenant union, whether it's something that's recognized by cities and states or not. And so I think what we're trying to figure out is the challenge about what is the apparatus that could exist in other places that could potentially regulate rents, recognize the tenants union, and then most critically, who would hold landlords accountable when they inevitably violate the law, right? And don't actually pass what's going to be happening. And so I really see this as an opportunity for government and for us to be pressuring government, as we're doing, to change what they see their role in the housing crisis and taking on a much more active role to protect tenants rather than working on behalf of the real estate industry. And elected officials really need to match where the tenant movement has already been and stand up to real estate to make sure that tenants are able to live with dignity and stability as they're demanding all across the country.
Thank you so much, Katie. So we're going to move into some of the questions that we've been getting from you all through the chat. So the first one that I want to lift up, we had a question about whether there's any kind of enabling funding mechanism in the law for tenant associations, kind of similar to the function that dues checkoffs serve in the workplace. I'm not sure who wants to take a stab at that, maybe Lena, but feel free, any of the panelists, to jump in.
Actually, that's a good question. I get that asked as I do door knocking. With the Tenants Association and within this ordinance, there is no dues, there is no fines, there's no fees. The only dues is participating in the association and becoming a member.
Thanks, Lena. And I think this one will be great for Deepa. Do you think that the ordinance could be passed, or a version of this ordinance, the right to organize for tenants, could be passed at the state level? It was tried once and it failed, but if attempted again, do you think it could pass?
So what's possibly, so we lost by 1 vote the last time, and I truly believe that the tenant movement is more powerful today than it was in 2019. There's more tenant organizations across the state. There's been a crisis because of COVID-19 and because of lockdown and people losing work. And I think there's just a different energy right now than there was at that time related to these issues. That said, in terms of what that law contains, I think that'll depend on the strength of and the unity within our coalition. So I think that's what it would take. We did pass a piece of it, which is the just cause did get passed for most tenants in California back when it was originally introduced. So it's no longer a reward for organizing, but it's a protection all tenants that most tenants have now. So this other piece, which is what was passed in San Francisco, in terms of expanding that piece alone, I do think there's room for that to happen at the state level.
Great, thank you. Well, that is promising. Next, maybe Madeline, you could take this one. So someone asked whether there are examples of tenant associations coordinating with labor or other community groups to advocate for development in their neighborhoods, particularly around the expansion of access to services like transportation or schools. So maybe Madeline, you could think about how you've tried to get your labor union more involved, or if you've worked with any other community groups, you could speak to that as well.
I think I'm gonna have to pass that. I have introduced the VTA to SEIU, as well as the asking them for support, and also from the Labor Council, being an active member of both. But I think Lena would be better at answering the majority of that question. Can I pass?
Sure.
Oh,
Hey,
everything I said. Did you hear anything I said?
yes, I did. Yes.
Oh, okay. I thought I was on mute. I'm sorry. Okay.
No. Yes, so there are so many tenants that are part of unions within their workplace. And so, we're just in the brinks of introducing, the ordinance to within the tenants working union. And it's another little structure test that we need to kind of really refine a little bit more, but it's exciting to see and know what tenants belong to a certain work union. We had done a survey within the beginning of this campaign, and so we're just trying to identify those tenants with their unions to see what they sort of support they can bring within the VTA.
Really helpful, thanks. And I think we have time for one more audience question. I know, Katie, we talked about this a little bit in our interview with you a few months ago, but someone asked whether there is anything unique about the San Francisco context that folks thinking about implementing a similar law in other places should be aware of. I know some things you've mentioned in the past are like the community organization infrastructure, the existence of a rent board. So maybe you could talk a little about that.
Sure. I mean, there are lots of states with home rule laws that mean that it's impossible for them to pass any kind of localized tenant protections, but that doesn't mean it could be impossible in terms of right to organize ordinances. And I think the thing that we have been thinking about a lot is, what does it look like for the apparatus that would actually be in charge of this, right? Like, what is the way that tenants register around their tenant unions? What are the ways that they actually are regulating this relationship, which is what I keep on going back to, is how do we have government apparatus actually see themselves as regulating an inherently exploitative relationship between tenants and landlords? And I think that community organizations, there is a way for them to play that role. And there should be tenants that are also, in charge of the part of that process, right? There should be a tenant-led process that creates that. But I think we're really at the initial stages of trying to shift how the government sees this role, and to make sure that unions are recognized in a way that benefits tenants and actually gets their protections and rights and dignity upheld.
Thanks, Katie. I think that is a really great note to end on. We're just at the hour now. So I wanted to thank everyone so much for being here. This has been great. I want to thank our panelists. I want to thank the UC Berkeley Labor Center and the Housing Rights Committee of San Francisco for sponsoring and helping us organize this event. I think we're all very much watching the rollout of the ordinance closely to see where successes and challenges continue to emerge. But I think today's panel has been really helpful to clarify what we've learned so far, what we should be thinking about moving forward. So yeah, I again want to say thank you to everyone, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you all. Take care.